So I think we'll get started. I'd like to welcome Liam Knoll here this evening from Gawler Central Football Club. I'd like to welcome council members and council staff to this session. I'd also like to acknowledge the land that we gather on today is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. This session has been convened for the purpose of briefing council members on the Gawler Sport and Community Recreation Facility Plan. This session will be used solely for the purposes of information sharing and not for the purposes of debating issues, building consensus positions, or otherwise discharging council's deliberative and decision-making functions. Members of Liam, you're encouraged to listen. I know you will listen. I know that you will to the information provided to council, but refrain from general conversation or commentary that may cause disruption to the session. If you want to ask questions, you can text them to me. Should the session become disruptive, the person presiding over this session I don't think we'll ask Liam to leave. I don't think that will be necessary. There is no set agenda and no minutes will be taken during this session. To limit disruption to the session, any mobile phones brought into the session are to be switched off or switched to silent or vibration alert mode, with telephone calls not to be taken within the immediate vicinity of the session. If you need to take a phone call, please take it outside. Should there become a requirement for this session to discuss any matters in confidence, I, as the chairperson of this session, shall inform observers of the reason. I don't have any reasons for going into confidence. I don't think we will be going into confidence for this session, and observers shall be required to leave the session. So I'll hand over to you, Bryce. Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming along tonight. Hopefully this will be an informative session. To be very fair and to be upfront, it will be very different from the last briefing we had relative to this project, but still looking for as much engagement as possible from members here tonight. So please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, raise your hand, and we can have that interactive conversation throughout this presentation. What I'm looking to talk through tonight is the Gawler Sport Community Recreation and Facility Plan. There'll be a number of key topics covered throughout this. The sport and community recreation challenges, so to provide an overall context of what the broader sense is relative to this topic, how it relates to council's strategic framework, talking through this plan specifically, its goals, its outcomes and its methodology, and then importantly at the end, trying to provide an understanding to yourselves and to the community as to where we start with this project, in particular relative to 2024 as a calendar year. False start on the... There you go. So this is taken out of Council's budget for this year and annual business plan. The Sport and Community Recreation Facility Plan will form the foundation for future investment in the town's sport and community recreation infrastructure. That really captures what this is all about. This is a foundation. As was discussed at the previous briefing, this project here and this plan is a component of a significant level of planning consideration and ultimately decision-making that's going to occur relative to sport, community recreation, infrastructure and service provision within the town now and going forward. While we've been talking a lot about infrastructure, there are a number of other components that will come along with this. Example of one of those being, so council has 3 lease policies that are aligned with community facilities and community organisations. Those 3 policies are due for review in September 2025, so 14 months away. The existing leases that fall out of those policies that are between council and community organisations across the town, predominantly run through to June 2027. So these are factors now that we're going to be thinking in terms of this project here, how they inform, how they work together with this. Another key component, council successfully owns, manages and delivers services from a number of community recreation facilities, the Aquatic Centre, the Elderly Centre, the Civic Centre here and the Sport and Community Centre. It's another consideration. So it's about how do we wrap all of these things together relative to this project and then what falls out of that going forward as well. A key part of this here, and starting from tonight, is trying to work towards a common knowledge base and a common understanding for everyone, from a staff, from a council member, and also from a community member and community organisation perspective, that will allow informed decision making and to understand the rationale behind those decisions, why they're being made, and what the impacts of those are. Out of that there, the two key underpinning messages and drivers out of this being that this is a foundational piece of work, but also it's very much driven by the philosophy of how can we collectively optimise community benefit. So collectively being staff, council as an organisation, council members and the community to optimise that community benefit. Talking through now from a broader context perspective, sport and community recreation challenges. So again, this is about this common knowledge, this common understanding about what some of these challenges are and how they're feeding into what we're doing here now and going forward. Some of these are far more obvious than others, and some are really clear, some less so, but it's about trying to work all of those together. Population and space. That's quite an obvious one in terms of Gawler and the surrounding areas as well, being very mindful of the surrounding areas. We'll see an increase in population now and going forward for the foreseeable decades relative to that there. So the considerations of how we're catering for the demand with existing and additional infrastructure, considerations for nearby developments, both to the south, the north, to the west, how they impact what we're doing, how what we do impacts what they do as well, that being a two-way street, and the limited greenfields availability there are in so many of these areas relative to providing sport infrastructure, as an example. It requires large areas of space. There's no two ways about that for many sporting activities, so that's a key consideration. The second one, most likely just as obvious relative to ageing infrastructure. Built infrastructure is quite obvious in terms of it being ageing and it can be seen, but there's also things that maybe are less obvious, things like irrigation. So Carbeathan Reserve and the baseball diamond out there being a good example of that there. The ageing infrastructure that was within that field there and the impact that that had prior to the redevelopment on their ability to play sport out there. How do we look at these things relative to the requirements for extensive maintenance, upgrade or replacement? It's not just a one-size-fits-all answer for those things there. Third one, change in compliance. So there are ongoing changes for compliance for infrastructure, and there's no real thought that that's going to change anytime soon. There's varied reasons for the changes in compliance. The two most obvious and key drivers for that being safety. An example being court runoffs around netball courts, basketball courts. The change in compliance that's happened to those over the last 15, 20 years is significant. But also equity is a significant driver relative to changes in compliance. Change rooms and non-sporting infrastructure in things like that are key drivers behind that there. Other more obscure things, council's public open space is audited, and the compliance around what's required from both a council as an organisation but the leaseholder, even to things such as securing soccer goals on sites. So the compliance is there, the compliance is layered, but it needs to be something that's considered across all of this. Life cycle costing. New and upgraded facilities need to be planned and developed with real consideration to these things. Synthetic turf is a perfect example of that there. While you're talking $1 million to put a synthetic turf pitch out, $1 million underground that you never see relative to preparations, There is then also the need to work through the process to come to the end of useful life and its replacement. And this is a significant problem. Synthetic turf as an example, a significant problem across Adelaide in terms of how that works. Lighting's another good example in terms of that there, the upgrade of lighting and then needing to plan for its replacement, whether that is from a club perspective, an organisation's council's perspective, all of these things need to be considered. The change to climate is a significant issue that is obviously happening to us. It's happening to our facilities as well in regards to warmer and a drier climate and increasing in both of those, but also increasing more extreme weather events, heat waves, rainfall. But that not only has an impact on infrastructure, but also on operations and management. Looking now in terms of the number of bowling greens that have shade cover across them, that was not a thing 15, 20 years ago, but is now becoming a more and more common thing to allow play to occur, shaded obviously from the sun. And the last one there is community expectations. I don't think it's a surprise for anyone here to say that society's expectations have changed relative to the provision of facilities, the provision of infrastructure. Expectations are much higher from the community and users, and that's all the way from grassroots all the way up to elite. I think the Gawler Aquatic Centre is a very good example of that there. The change rooms that are down there now, they meet the expectations of the community in 2024. The change rooms that were installed in 1962 met the needs of the community then, and 5 years ago, before they were redeveloped, they weren't meeting the needs of the current community. That's a large scale, even the same site on a smaller scale in terms of starting blocks for competitive swimming. And even in the time I've been here, there's been a number of iterations in terms of that there is what's required for even the level of competition that's being run out of that facility is very different, and it will continue to evolve. Continuing with further challenges, and unfortunately there's lots of challenges, but getting them all out there. Cooperating and sharing facilities. This relates to the maximising and the use of resources, and that's not just buildings from a financial perspective, includes the opportunities to work and collaborate with schools, private sector on a broader sense, but also can be at a site level. The Elliott Goodger master plan that was presented last night, sharing facilities was a key part of the driving philosophy behind where the club rooms is located there, rather than providing multiple club rooms, one for netball, one for football, providing a single shared facility there to better utilise resources, not only from a cost perspective, but on a game day perspective and how the club can use that. Emerging sports. This is around how you adapt to changes in demand. They can be driven by cultural influences, trends, pop culture. I don't think it'd be a stretch to say that rock climbing has not been massively influenced by the fact that it was part of the 2021 Olympics. This has driven a significant boom in facilities across Adelaide. There's two current major facilities. There's one being built and there's another one being planned for Hindley Street in the old cinemas there. That's driven as an emerging trend, an emerging sport. We need to be considering those. Technology obviously influences everything, but how to take the opportunities at the right time, whether they are simple things such as the Gawler District Tennis Association use remote access to provide community use to their courts. How do we incorporate those things into these projects? Inactivity. Obviously, we're leading increasingly sedentary lifestyles, apart from the man in Sydney who was running way too far yesterday. But the overall impact to community health relative to that there. What's the cost to the community broadly for that? Resourcing, again, a quite obvious one. Even looking at that from just a person resourcing, that relates to councils, that relates to community, relates to the organisations, it relates to government, state government and other levels of government. The Office for Recreation, Sport and Racing is a different organisation than it was previously, as well as peak bodies and state sporting organisations, the resourcing that comes with that, the resourcing that is available to assist in these projects. And the last one there being information. So that talks about the information and the collation of information, and this will be clearly shown within this project. The need to make informed decisions with full, accurate and timely information and data to allow that. That clearly also is driven by the previous one, the resourcing, about having the resourcing to be able to collect the data to make the decisions. The last one of the challenges here, sustainability of clubs and organisations from a financial perspective, a social perspective, and also environmental perspective. Facilities and clubs need to be viable and able to sustain themselves. Unfortunately, there are examples where, for all best intentions, that hasn't come to fruition in the real world. Summit Sport and Recreation Park in Mount Barker is one of the more well-known ones of that, relative to it being developed and the community not having a high utilisation of that site. How do we ensure things like that are considered throughout the process? Governance, not only from a council and a sports provider perspective, having good governance that's effectively and regularly reviewed, and how do clubs align with their peak bodies to ensure that those things are being met. It's challenging, and that's linked to community expectations, and also in terms of the next one, relative around volunteer management. The changes in attracting and retaining quality volunteers are a challenge for all organisations, and sporting and community organisations are not able to avoid that there. They've traditionally been built on that basis of a pure volunteer scenario. Is that something that is sustainable going forward, and are there innovative ways to address that? The last one there is balancing the needs for local community and organised sport. As an organisation, council has numerous areas of responsibilities, numerous areas of interest. This is talking about the balancing of the local community and organised sport. There does need to be that balance relative to providing community recreation facilities, but also providing opportunities for the casual kickabout, organised sport through organised clubs such as Gawler Gymnastics, the 3 cricket clubs within Gawler, Central Districts Basketball Club, but then taking that next step forward in terms of what are the pathways that are available for people within our community towards elite sporting opportunities. Gawler has numerous, I could sit here for the next hour in terms of talking about that, and it's from such a broad range of sports and activities, people like Riley McGree, Trafina Nikolai, the Matthews father and son, Scott and Riley, BMX champions. In terms of those things there, how do we provide opportunities for that going forward?
Any questions so far? Yep.
Fascinating. Thank you very much.
I'll just turn your mic on. Sorry, I turned it off.
You probably
There you
don't
go.
need it. But I think probably the one thing, I know I've said it a number of times, but are all the users that are all part of this, after this professional speech that you've just told us about this, the way it's going, were they all invited here tonight? I mean, we've got the wonderful Central District Football Club member down there, but were the others along? Quite often, all this great work that's done, the community that are going to be using it and that don't seem to come along for the ride. And it tends to concern me a little bit there. What was the other one? I've forgotten what the other one I was going to say now. But and the other thing is, in your reporting and things like that you do, when it comes to the point of where Gawler is situated in such a beautiful central area, the point of the users of the facilities that we construct, there's been a fair bit of conversation about Calbeeba, how Calbeeba out there and so forth, as to how many people in the Adelaide Plains, the Playford areas and all the other areas that we are constructing will be using those facilities. Is that of need for you to know when you're planning these things, or and is there any records kept of that particular who uses type thing?
There you go.
Sorry. In regards to the first question, no, not all organisations were invited to tonight. This will be, and it will show in the later part of this presentation in terms of how planning to engage with the community organisations going forward, but not invited to tonight's discussion. In regards to this anecdotal understanding of who is participating in what sports and the like. That's only anecdotal, and again, that comes back to one of those challenges there around timely and full information. It is very sport specific, so there will be some sports within Gawler that have a higher proportion of participants from the town, and other sports that have a higher participation coming from outside of the boundaries. There will be a level of participation understanding that comes about from this project here, and we will be able to provide far greater detail and answer to that going forward.
That's better. There you go. So, Nathan, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just quickly, thank you, Mayor. Bryce, are you able just to give us a little bit of an understanding of the risk that we could be at of losing some of these sporting clubs to other areas? I mean, a good example is our strong basketball here, but obviously they don't have enough courts at the Starplex, so they're splitting their competition over a couple of different grounds as their band-aid fixed. Are you able just to, I guess, touch on those sorts of broader comments as well?
There you go.
I guess anecdotally can respond to that, and broadly, there are requirements across all of the sports, I would suggest, within Gawler to have some level of assessment review as to what is being provided. In terms of what that is relative to, minor upgrades, better maintenance, significant capital works, whether that's governance, some of those other challenges there would be, without a doubt, some sporting and community recreation clubs within Gawler that are both struggling to be sustainable, be viable going forward. The same way there's examples of other sorts of community organisations as well. I'm not aware of any that have specific desires or specific plans to relocate en masse out of the town. But again, that would be working through with the organisations relative to where they see themselves going forward from a strategic perspective. Yeah. What are their thoughts relative to their growth? Are there sports out there that would be, responding to those emerging trends that they will be booming in the next 4 years, and whatever planning we do may not suffice that. It needs to be an informed decision-making process, which we need to get this information to make that and have that collective understanding and rationale behind. That being said, as mentioned earlier, this infrastructure planning does need to be done with consideration for everything that's happening north, south and west of Gawler, because, as mentioned earlier, relative to the sharing and the cooperating, that comes down to facility provision as well. The idea of duplicating services along, as an example, along Smith Road, Dalkeith Road axis there, probably doesn't benefit anybody. Doesn't benefit us on this side of the line, the City of Playford either. How can we work collaboratively to plan these things better and provide better outcomes for the community? Very much aware that most sports are regional sports. Most sports are going to draw from a larger than, in particular, Gawler's footprint. We need to be considerate of that.
Mm-hmm. So, any other questions, Councillor Koch?
I've got two examples. The tennis courts at Playford, I know that the club that was there actually relocated to Salisbury because it was too expensive, so that's an issue. The other thing is Playford's going to build a skating rink, like an ice skating rink. And anecdotal, people are saying to me, oh, well, once that's built, I'm going to leave, rollerblading and go down there. So that could impact on what happens at the rec centre, because people would just go, well, I'll just go there, because there's better pathways into other things. So, yeah, that's just two examples of where things can change.
There is a family that live in Calbeeba that go to my husband's gym, and they're in state ice hockey, and they have to go down to Adelaide, and the ice hockey rink would be very convenient for them. Very convenient. Yeah. So he takes eggs to gym. Anyway, that's how much more proof do you need? Okay, any other questions? Any further questions? No? Okay, keep going. Keep going. Oh, there you go. Sorry.
So in terms of all of those challenges there, and this is about being upfront now and acknowledging that this project is not going to be able to address all of those challenges. There are going to be challenges that fall out of the scope of this project. And as is shown there, this project is being driven as a facility plan. That's not to say that early on, and obviously already potentially we've identified that there'll be further work that comes out of this project, that comes out of the conversations we're having relative to participation, demand. It's going to lead on to other conversations. Again, this being that foundation. So really, in terms of the challenges that have just gone through, within this project, the facility project, we won't be looking around the sustainability of clubs, the governance of clubs, and the volunteer management to clubs.
Yep.
But how do we collectively move forward in the face of those challenges, particularly acknowledging that there are challenges out there that are being experienced today that we're not addressing at the moment?
What if a club comes to council and asks for governance advice?
So
that happened at Carpethan?
Yes, as we've done previously, we would respond and take that on a case-by-case basis. The reality is that we would never want to be seen and not acting in a situation to allow a club to deteriorate to a point of it being unable to provide what is a community service. Okay. That could be undertaken completely concurrently, but separate to this project. And it may be that throughout having increased conversations with clubs and with their committees, that some of those factors become more obvious and become known to us. So it's about acting on information that we receive throughout the time we're developing this project.
Okay, right. Another question. Thank you, Councillor Kosh.
Bryce, you talked about Dalkeith Road.
Oh, I just turned you off. Sorry. Just press it again.
You talked about Dalkeith Road and having a facility on both sides. You said it wasn't advantageous for either of us. Why is that the case? Because I would have thought that our council needed to provide sporting facilities for its residents, and Playford is obviously wanting to provide theirs. In fact, in the Bunyip today, there was, the mayor quoting that they needed, Playford mayor saying they needed more sports facilities. So why would we expect our residents to go and play at Playford, for example? Is that what you're saying? Or what's the rationale behind what you said?
Okay. There you go.
So just to clarify, it would be around working collaboratively around that planning, and if there is a number of sporting precincts being planned along that axis there, they are complementary sports. There's not 3 football clubs trying to exist within, as the crow flies, 800 metres. It's about working collaboratively to say, okay, so is it better to have soccer at one, Australian rules football at one, and then provide hockey or another field sport further away? It's about being aware of those things there. Yeah. It's about being aware of the situation of other Australian rules football clubs between Gawler and Elizabeth, relative to what the strengths are in that area as well. Obviously, no secret in terms of the challenges around Elizabeth Football Club and Smithfield Football Club recently. It's about having just an understanding and, I guess, considering all of those factors where available.
Yep, just another question.
I just want to follow up. We're going to have a population of an extra 22,000 people. We've got 3 main sporting clubs. I assume are we assuming that those 3 clubs are going to actually provide all the services for that increased population, or are we looking at new sporting clubs? Because with 26,000 people, we've got 3 sporting clubs, another 22. Where do they fit in? For example, with the football, you've got your A, B, under 17.5, 15, 13, minis, mini-monis. How are you going to fit all those people into those divisions so that people will just miss out? Unless, for example, the football clubs go to another league.
They've only got so many players for the individual teams.
That's right. You've only got 22 or
Yeah.
whatever players. So all of a sudden you're going to have 80% more people, for example. Where are they going to play their footy and their sports? Because if you don't put another football club down there and you decide, oh, you've all got to play hockey now, you know, how are you going to actually satisfy that need?
I'll go to Bryce. You can answer that, Bryce. There you go. I'll go to you next, Helen. Okay.
So through this process, I'm not going to assume anything. To be fair, this is going to be driven by not only a population projection, but also looking at sport-specific projections of demand going forward. This is my opinion. I don't believe that football, and that's both footballs, round ball and Australian rules, will continue to grow with the same demand that they have over the last 12 years. The last 12 years has seen a huge increase in participation of both football codes. I would suspect that that would level off over the next time. But we will need to work through that with organisations such as the SANFL to look at what their projections are relative to specific sports, and then be able to provide actual data-driven, this is how many sporting fields we need, and then look in terms of that as the example, how many clubs does that sort of number require? Because the difficulty in establishing a new club is significant. There aren't new clubs being established there aren't many in the last 15, 20 years north of Adelaide, outside of Angle Vale. There's a reason behind new sporting clubs.
Volunteers. They need lots
New
of
sporting clubs
volunteers.
are not developed regularly. So in answer to that, it's not about assumptions, it's about making informed decisions. So we can look in terms of the participation projections for Australian rules football, cricket and netball, if that's the example being a community sport that is still playing country sport. For those there, require this amount of infrastructure. And then is that a 3-club scenario? Is that a 4-club scenario? They're the answers to that.
You will need another club. You will need another club. Helen?
Well, Bryce has almost answered the question, but I think we're extraordinary that we have got 3 strong sporting associations. And as somebody who's involved in providing sports administration in what might be called a minor sport, and Bryce is saying, the sporting associations, statewide associations that we'll be liaising with, it's not up to council to decide whether the town requires an extra sporting club. It's the sporting clubs to sort that out in conjunction with their state bodies. So I think we're going to be, I think the plan to survey people, to get their information back, to be well informed is exactly what we need to do. But I think we've got to be really careful. It's not our role to say we're having growth, therefore we must have this, this and this happening in the sporting field. It's up to the sporting associations to decide that. It has always been their decisions, and I think all we can do is support them.
Liam, do you want to add anything to that?
AFL's prediction at the moment is a new sporting field every week.
I beg your pardon? I can't. Come up to one of the microphones and just sit there, and there you go.
Yeah, from our last AFL facilities catch-up, it was, I think, 1 sporting field or 1 AFL oval every week for the next 3 years to manage sort of projections coming through, but they're not suggesting extra clubs. It's the teams that are supporting those clubs, women's football, juniors, all that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I'll go to David. David had his hand up.
The other side of the sport sort of side of thing is sort of our ageing population, which is sort of, and having those older footy teams and others is also going to be something, I think, in the future that's probably going to be pushed. Unfortunately, preventative health, we have dropped that ball for probably the last 15, 20 years. So in our older population, we've actually got now the most unhealthy, and our actually death rate has actually dropped. Instead of growing, it's actually dropped. And so what we're hearing in the health area is in state and federal government, they are going to be putting a lot of money into preventative health, because we can't keep building massive hospitals
you'll
overnight
need more
either.
dietitians, you'll need more occupational therapists, you'll need more physiotherapists, you'll need more chiropractors. So etc., etc. Yeah.
And
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there's opportunities there, I think, for the town as well, to sort of get on the front foot with some of the preventative health and those programs and sort of work with the clubs and existing organisations as well. But yeah, it's certainly going to be a big push in the next few years.
My colleague who works as a vascular nurse practitioner at the Lyell McEwen Hospital has never seen as many morbidly obese people in the north, and she's currently working to manage that population. Yeah, so that's and morbidly obese people are quite. They've got vascular issues. They've got diabetic foot. They've got peripheral neuropathies. They've got all sorts of things happening to them, and yeah, they're not in a really healthy way. Yeah, so that's unfortunate. Okay. Paul, yes?
Just quickly, through you, Bryce, when will we get that information about the demand for more sporting facilities? I don't know, because that really shapes what we're going to do. Because if the AFL is saying, no, there is going to be growth, because I doubt whether the AFL is going to say there isn't going to be growth. I doubt that. So that actually shapes what we're going to do here. And the other comment I want to just touch on again is that I mentioned the regional health plan a number of meetings ago, and I talked about the economic return, and the economic return for that is preventative health. So it's
we've got to get back.
It's not incurring those health expenses. Yeah. So where do we put our money? Do we put our money into lavish big ovals, or do we put it into preventative health? That's something I think we really need to seriously look at.
Yeah,
because when you build lavish sporting ovals, you're actually supporting the fit people anyway, but you're not necessarily helping the people that really need that long term, because it's avoided health costs, which is you're trying to achieve.
Isaac?
Just a question, just to sort of bring it back in case I misunderstood. So this process, this plan, some of the concerns being raised, is that we're charting the need, we're gathering information about what the need is so that we can plan what facilities we need. We're not planning the facilities yet. This is what we're doing. Yeah, cool. Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, I think, in that case, and hopefully a lot of these concerns are, addressed when we do it.
Thank you. Yes.
So, yes. I'd like to hope that also some of the concerns and some of the questions that are being asked will be addressed within the presentation tonight in terms of, in particular, the next steps over the next few months. And interesting, Councillor Hughes' comment relative to, ageing population. Sports are recognising that and actually decreasing ages for things like masters. It's surprising now how many sports masters are capped at 35 or 40. So there's a lot of opportunities for that there.
They play at 50. Sorry? 50, 60, 70, 80.
Yeah, and lots of those things, masters now start at 35. So
I
yeah.
was going to say walking is probably the most important, it's the most popular recreational occupation and the least damaging to people.
Okay. Keep going, Bryce.
So this project here obviously has a key link to Council's strategic framework, community plan being part of that. The objectives and strategies there are part of the draft community plan that's out for consultation at the moment, but really talk to what this project is relative to looking at community sport recreational facilities that respond to local and regional needs. The draft community plans, its objectives and strategies mirror these sorts of goals here for service provision as well. So again, it's showing that there's a link between the infrastructure and the service provision and program. So we need to continue that along. Obviously, a project such as this has a huge link to the long-term financial plan. That being refined and updated in the coming months, it works well. The ongoing refinement of the asset management plans It's also worthwhile to reference that the sport and community infrastructure that we're discussing here sits not only within open space asset management plan, but also council's building asset management plans, but it also sits outside of council's asset management plans relative to grounds leases and leased facilities. So it is a very complex sort of scenario there, in particular how that relates to facilities.
When are we getting our asset management plans back to council? When are they being updated?
Hello, yes. So the draft plans will come back to council in September to go to community consultation over October, with the plan of bringing them back for adoption in November. So the building asset management plan is having a major refresh with all of its new condition data, as is the transport suite of assets. The stormwater and open space asset management plans are being updated based on older condition data, but the open space assets are having their condition assessed this financial year, so we're in the process of doing the specification for that at the moment. And so that will be a well-timed input into this process as well, so that's worked out quite well.
Thank you. Thank you for that update. Any other questions? Any other questions? You can keep going, Bryce.
Thank you. So in regards to the goals of this plan here, a key one of those being to update the existing strategic plan, update GOSRIP. So that plan was developed in 2016. Major focus of that was the development of master plans across the town, which is nearly done. Council and those master plans, we're approaching $14.5 million of capital investment since their adoptions, and that's including being able to attract $8 million of external funding, and that's on top of the capital investment that we've done relative to the Aquatic Centre refurb and operational costs for developing and continuing program delivery at those sites. So it's now about looking at that strategic implementation. I've touched on the majority of those dot points up there. The last one is a very key thing that will need to occur through this project here, and it's to align what we're doing here in the town of Gawler with stakeholders and their strategic plans. That's the Office for Recreation, Sport and Racing, a key part of that, their Game On strategy. It has 4 key principles around equity, evidence-based, collaboration and funding and resources, all things that we've been talking about relative to this project here. We also need to be making sure that how we're developing our plans for infrastructure here aligns with the SANFL, aligns with SACA, aligns with Basketball SA, to make sure that when we're lobbying and advocating for funds, they're in our corner and saying the same things that we're saying. So the outcomes out of this project here: capital project prioritisation, an implementation program, and asset service guidelines. This is a long-term delivery. There's no doubt about that. It will be within the long-term financial plan, the asset management plan, but the delivery of what we're talking about relative to providing sporting and recreation infrastructure for a town even of our population today, but also going forward, will be a long-term plan and a long-term implementation. We need to be really upfront about that. Some of the things that we'll be talking about here will have timelines of 2050. They'll have timelines that far away in terms of where this is. But a key part of what we're doing here is trying to be aware of that, be everybody aware of that. So we have that understanding collectively about the timelines, about the priorities, and also about the rationale as to why they are where they are. It really leads into the next slide there, and come back again and banging on the same drum, but this is about the foundation for the future investment. There's 3 things there. Existing infrastructure and future infrastructure on the surface are in themselves straightforward. But there are so many other additional considerations and how they change now and how they change going forward. That's what falls into that 3rd dot point relative to the operational and infrastructure management around expectations, responsibilities, and the operational delivery of those. There's a few areas there to cover off on. Leasing and licensing, as I touched on earlier. So council has 3 different leasing policies, a grounds lease, a shared facilities lease and a structural lease. They were adopted by Council in 2021, and they've been used as the basis for the current leases that are in place between Council and these organisations. The policies, as I said earlier, are due for a review next year, and the leases again in 2027. So there will be, no doubt, conversations that fall out of the engagement here relative to clubs now, clubs going forward, their infrastructure, their demands, which will input and influence those conversations about the lease, the licences, how they are. And to be fair, leases and licences across local governments and with community sporting organisations are as varied as there are councils. There are so many different ways to do it. There are pros and cons that come with all of those. It's about taking this opportunity with more information that we have as a collective and better engagement that we've got with these organisations to look at the current leases that we have, the current policies. Are they contemporary? Are they meeting council's needs? Are they meeting the community needs? What are the things that we could be looking at going forward with those there? Ownership. So this relates to ownership of infrastructure, whether that's council, community. Does that change if council puts in multi-million dollars into an investment? Does that change the ownership? Does that change the leasing and licensing around that? Does that change the maintenance requirements? Again, there's many ways to look at those things there, and that will be another one of these projects that falls out of what we're doing now and will be something that will be progressing over time with this foundation. The last one there is the operational, and this relates more to council-operated, council-managed and owned facilities, such as the Sport and Community Centre. Council did investigate the opportunity of outsourcing its facilities, the Sports Centre and the Aquatic Centre, about 12 years ago. Went through the process of expressions of interest, a number of received, they were assessed, and the decision at that time was the council maintain ownership, management and delivery of those services to provide the services that it is for the community today. It's fair to say that things are very different in that sphere now than they were 12 years ago. I think the farm at Freeling is a very good example of that. 12 years ago, it would have seemed highly unlikely that that would be a facility that would be outsourced to a commercial operation. Belgravia today operate that facility out of Freeling. There are very different models and setups and arrangements between local government and commercial operators than there were 12 years ago. So another consideration to be in the mix here relative to when we're looking at new facilities, significant upgrades. I guess in terms of touching on that there's so many different ways that that can be achieved and managed and delivered, need to be really clear that the outsourcing of the management operation of a facility is not a magic wand to eliminate the cost. Obviously last night at CCS talking about the Aquatic Centre and what it costs council to operate that facility each year. Just by outsourcing that to Belgravia or Bluefit, it doesn't mean that it's going to cost council nothing. That's just the reality of that there. And even in terms of those scenarios about outsourcing, again, there's multiple different ways of that, whether the asset owner, such as council, maintains the need to upgrade and undertake all capital works, or simply there's arrangements where we could outsource the pool and we just provide a service fee to a third party as an organisation to run it. That might be just as expensive as what we're doing right now today. It's a very complex thing to look through, but something for consideration. How do we wrap all this up? In a scarf. In a scarf. So, sorry, had to do that because we've got Gossarup was the last plan, so this one's got a better name at least. I wanted to, but I thought I can't go any actual sporting clubs because that's just too dangerous. It definitely wasn't going to be black and gold. All jokes aside, this is a whole thing about how do we optimise community benefit. And it is not only wrapping up all of these considerations here, but wrapping us all up as a community into this here. This is a very multifaceted process, very nuanced in terms of how we're going to engage and how we're going to come together for it. Leans into how we're going to do this, methodology. This sort of a bit of a snapshot of step by step talking through the major parts. identify current and forecast participation, which is going to be driven by not only a population scenario, but also engagement with clubs and organisations. The population projections then combined with that sport-specific data will give a nuanced understanding of what sports are going to be going forward with the best evidence that we've got available. And as I said earlier, it's looking in terms of what impacts have happened previously. Australian rules football and soccer have both experienced huge increases in female participation in the last 12 to 15 years. It's about looking in terms of, is that participation demand going to increase at that same rate? Is it going to taper off? Again, there's emerging sports as flagged earlier, but looking at that from a holistic perspective. The second dot point there, identifying future facility requirements. That must have significant consideration to the existing. We have a lot of existing facilities within Gawler. We must have consideration to what we have when we're trying to identify these future facility requirements. It's definitely not the throw the baby out with the bathwater scenario. We need to know what we've got as a basis right now, and that needs to be the starting point.
Any questions? No? No, everyone's looking quiet. Any questions? No. So, back to you, Bryce.
Thank you.
Keep going.
Opportunities, so through that, it's effectively, as we've discussed, it's gaining that information, then assessing the opportunities to cater for that future provision. Is that within our existing master plan precincts? Is that within an additional master plan precinct? Is that within schools? Schools are the often discussed scenario as the silver bullet. You've got all that open space that's only used between 8:30 and 3:30 every day, and outside of that, nothing happens. This is the nut that the industry has been trying to crack for decades. The current scenario with state government schools is that the ability to access after hours at those sites is governed by the school principal. The school principal leaves 1 year, you have to have the same scenario, the same conversation. The community club needs to have the same conversation with the next principal next year. They might not be so community-minded. It is something that both Department for Education, Office for Export and Racing and councils are pushing more and more. It will be a consideration. It's just to be upfront that is not the silver bullet that everyone seems to think it is. It is going to be a challenge going forward. Are there other options as well? And obviously we talk about state schools. Is there the ability to utilise private schools? Is there the ability to look at all of these things? And rather than just simply saying no and ruling things out without investigating it, what can we do? What can we try to help sort of provide for the community? Through that, they're assessing the opportunities to cater for that provision. It then comes down to identifying what those future facility needs are. Obviously, that's the last piece of this puzzle. Is that the updates to the master plans, and then the prioritisation of those works there. That's the final outcome out of that. So all of those things there, this now comes down to the what next, what's the first part of this here. The first step is to plan forward. We must be informed and have a clear understanding of the existing, as I said earlier. To do this, it's proposed that we undertake a state of the play report. This will be two-pronged. The inspection and audit of sport and recreation sites. So this is engaging a sports auditor to partner with staff for the inspection and auditing of facilities. Anticipating that this will look at all community land facilities. So using that as an overarching term, being community land facilities, whether that is the Sport and Community Centre as a council-owned and operated facility, or whether that is a community leased facility, such as the bowling club, on community land. So how do all of these things here, we'll be encompassing all of those, looking at the condition, looking at compliance, looking at life cycle data to try and get a full understanding of these facilities. The second part of that would occur concurrently, and is club and organisation engagement. And it comes back to this idea of trying to get the best data relative to participation, the best data from those organisations relative to their priorities, and then use that information to link with the considerations for future infrastructure. Up front, that process to engage with the community sporting and community recreation organisations within Gawler that utilise our facilities, that lease facilities from council, and also those that don't fall into either of those buckets. Central Districts Basketball, an example. The Gawler Knights Volleyball Club, an example of that. Those are also clubs that need to be engaged with through this process. That is a significant process in itself. That's over 100 organisations to go and have conversations with, sit down, talk through, and it may not be a single conversation. That may evolve over time. These are not conversations that we've had across the board with all of these organisations, but it's what we need to do right now. This year is sure.
Thanks. Bryce, would that include passive recreation as well?
Do you have an example of it might be easy to answer, a club? At this point, no. We're looking at facilities as part of this here. If there's a facility that is involved in it, yes. If there's not a facility, no. I would believe that that is captured within strategic planning, such as the walking and cycling plan. As a community unorganised activity, such as that. If it's an organised activity that requires a facility, yes. That's going to be a little bit horses for courses, but I would say that's my philosophy going forward.
So would that cover the parkrun course that's sort of half in Light and half in Gawler? Well, it's a walking track. It's bitumised and it needs toilets and stuff.
I would say yes. On a blink response, yes. And that's where there's going to be a little bit of nuance with this here. We're going to have to, we can't just say hard and fast, yes, no, to all of these things. There's going to be a considered response to all of those.
Yeah, you've got 200 people come to Parkrun every Saturday morning. Yeah. And they're it's the 7th anniversary. It'll be 200 plus.
And it may evolve out of that the engagement occurs with those organisations.
Yeah.
And that's the key part of this, relative to this process here. That doesn't require so much of, in particular around the compliance of sport facilities through a sports audit or anything like that there. But it would be, staff engagement with those organisations. And I don't think that by having an additional data set and level of information could hurt us in any way.
Just quickly, that is an organised group, and I think they really value their partnership with the town of Gawler, which is really quite good. So, but yeah, I think going back to Councillor Koch, those the cycling and walking path, I think, sort of cover the ones that aren't sort of organised. But yeah, I certainly like the idea of doing the audit of all the facilities. I think that's sort of going to give that level playing field and sort of clean slate and sort of where we're at. And it's going to be quite scary too.
What are your thoughts on the audit of facilities? Yeah.
Here's one I prepared earlier.
Oh.
Okay, so this is an excerpt of a public document from the City of Port Adelaide Enfield. This is a document that they undertook and finalised in 2021. It is effectively a state of play report. It is being used consistently, annually, and strategically in long term by the council to drive the infrastructure decisions. And again, it is the same philosophy that I've been talking here around that common knowledge and the collective understanding of what all these things are from a council perspective, from a community perspective, from a peak body perspective, to be able to look at this document here and go, okay, where do we sit with all of these things, to then make that informed decision. So this is the public-facing document in terms of what is publicly available, and shows some of the things that would be covered through this state of play and the sports auditing. So it looks in terms of the actual assets that have been inspected, building, playing greens, supporting infrastructure being things such as change rooms, medical facilities, fencing, spectator amenity and lighting, which is a key thing in terms of the compliance for lighting on our sporting infrastructure. So it provides a summary of the condition, compliance to sporting standards, and an understanding of what the compliance is for lighting there. It also provides condition rating for those things that have been assessed, as well as providing some detail around participation numbers, clubs and organisations' priorities, and then other observations as well. So this is the type of report that we're looking to undertake across 2024, and to be really frank, that is the time frame that we're looking to undertake this year, as I explained in terms of, while there's not a huge number of actual sporting facilities across Gawler that need the auditing from the sports auditing perspective, there's so many clubs, organisations that need to be engaged with. We need to ensure that everybody comes along right from the beginning with this process here. Everybody has the ability to feed in their participation, feed in their priorities, so we can make a collective decision based on all of that information. This comes back to the previous slide that I had before. So the state of the play is 2024 relative to this project, and it is that foundation for the future in investment. Expectation is that the outcomes of what we get out of the state of play report will inform what are the immediate and short-term responses. As outlined earlier, there are a number of leases, a number of organisations that have leases with council over facilities, over buildings, over playing surfaces, there's licences. This report here will also identify within those and with regard to those leases what is council's responsibilities and what sits as the leaseholder's responsibilities within those documents. It will then allow council to have a full picture of those issues, those challenges that are being felt out there in the community. So informed decisions can be made relative to investment, existing infrastructure to allow for the provision of future infrastructure. We need to ensure that, we are making decisions now that allow for existing infrastructure to be maintained and to be used 7 days a week like it is now, to keep people active and keep people participating. We need to make sure that existing infrastructure the condition of it is understood, and we're working through what the investment is required to make sure that infrastructure can continue to be used. As I said earlier, that there'll be parts of this project that we identify future infrastructure and put the date next to that of 2050. So if that's the redevelopment of some club's facility, collectively council and that organisation need to be planning for the next 25 years before the realisation of that there. And that sounds stark and sounds, potentially troubling, but that's just the reality of what this will need to be. So for context as well, in terms of even if we are working through the future infrastructure, there still needs to be the rationale behind that as to why, but also the understanding of what that involves relative to existing infrastructure as well. This building here is a good example in terms of the time that was required relative to making the first decisions about grant submissions, developing them up, and actually getting the funding. The day the funding was announced through to the day that the Mayor cut the ribbon was just short of 4 years. So even from the time that the funding is announced, there's a significant amount of time until we can push play and people can out there enjoy it. We need to plan for that future infrastructure, ensuring that the existing can continue to be used through that time. That will include ongoing maintenance, but also capital works. There will be some level of capital works required at these sites, with these realisations influencing that operational and infrastructure management as discussed earlier, relative to expectations, responsibilities from council, from organisations as well. And it will also, this project here, will also include further work. Sport and recreation planning going forward for the community is going to involve other work, potentially around those challenges that were acknowledged earlier that won't fit within this scope. Club sustainability, financially, volunteers, compliance, governance. There's going to be challenges that, poke their head up relative to those areas that we're going to find out about through this process here. We need to work through that going forward as well. I think my parting message for this project here is about how we collectively optimise the community benefit. We as an organisation, we as a community, how are we optimising that community benefit going forward?
Through you, Mayor. Bryce, when we do the auditing, what happens if we find something that is really not compliant? I can think of some examples where just they really aren't compliant. So what do we do, realising that it would cost a lot of money to upgrade, that part of that facility when you think long term it's going to be maybe moved somewhere else?
So depending on what the actual non-compliance is relative to safety or equity, because there's numerous examples at the moment based on what the current standards are, where much or a number of areas of infrastructure are not compliant, but they are existing infrastructure. It's similar to if you do building work on a building. If you don't touch your building, it stays like that. But if you upgrade your building, you need to bring it up to code with that there. It would be looking in terms of areas of non-compliance. What is the risk around that from a club, from a participant perspective, and working not only with council and the organisation, but also with the state sporting body. If there are non-compliances that pose significant risk, we need to act on those. If there are non-compliances, to say that there are open urinals in change rooms, which is now a non-compliance, that is not a non-compliance that automatically stops or precludes that sport continuing along.
Nathan's got a question.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the compliance issue, a good example of that is what we've seen in the swimming pool, and not quite, taking a fair few seasons to bring that water quality up to what is in current standards. There is a difference between compliancy and condemning, and I think that's what we need to be clear on. But yes, we do see it all the time in refurbishment works. You touch that area, you might be doing some minor works, and all of a sudden you're widening doors, you're providing access, and you're putting in ramps and all the rest of it, because that's what we need to comply with in that space. Just in regards to the auditing, Bryce, because I know this will be a question that we'll inevitably get. When we talk about, we're going to audit our sporting facilities and we're going to check it against current day standards across the board of all the complexities you've talked about there, the question that we will probably get is, so when was the last audit done? Where is our baseline data? Am I right to say it has been more ad hoc and not a systematic audit across the time, or do we have some foundation data that we can actually check in on?
So from a lease perspective, it will be a varied answer relative to that there. So some sports regularly are conducting audits on facilities of clubs across the state. Other sports do not do that. So there will be a level of data, because them being a leased facility, even using the SANFL as an example, the SANFL review and audit of the facilities within Gawler is undertaken by the SANFL in conjunction with the clubs. It is that sort of scenario there. So we will have access to some level of information, but there will be some where there's not been specific sports auditing undertaken on facilities, possibly ever.
Sorry, just to follow up on that. Yes, understand the SANFL just checking in on, their grassroots sporting programs and affiliates. My question is more, let's use Gawler South as an example. We're talking about our plan going out and auditing clubs and facilities like this, and I'm only using Gawler South because it's a hot topic at the moment, as you know, Bryce. So when we go out and conduct our information gathering, this would be the first time that we as Town of Gawler have gone out through that lens to that level of auditing that you're talking about this strategy capturing, or it's a check-in on a process of a more systematic way that will align with audits that happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Well, yeah, just trying to get a bit of a handle on that, just so we're clear on how to answer that question.
My understanding, this would be the most comprehensive and far-reaching relative to specific sporting infrastructure. I'm not aware of regular or irregular lighting lux reviews that have been undertaken, as an example, across any of the leased sites there. And it is important to note here at this point, we will be having to work very closely with these sporting organisations in this auditing as well, and see this as very much a partnership throughout that there. And while the outcomes of this may not be all green in terms of the colour coding, this is an information gathering thing. We need to be in this together. We need to be making sure that, just as council will open the doors for the aquatic centre and, you know, allow inspections to occur, audits to occur, the expectation is that we'd get the same sort of cooperation from all of the other clubs to do that as well, I guess, in the idea of getting the best information that we can to ensure we can make better and more informed decisions going forward.
My question was just around I guess some of the facilities are community groups or have some level of involvement with council, and some, you take the Starplex for example, they have their own pool, their own basketball courts. So when you're covering that in this plan, is that something that when you're looking at basketball, are you sort of looking at from the lens of, I don't know, just wanted to get some clarification if that makes sense.
Starplex will be a very interesting one in terms of that's a private facility. The organisation, I guess the facilities I've been talking about previously, I put under the umbrella of community land facilities. So facilities, whether they're council owned and operated or leased to an organisation, they're on community land. That's our focus in this. That being said, we can't exclude Starplex as a facility, 100%. And it may be that, there's conversations that occur with the management and operation of Starplex and the users of Starplex, Central Districts as a key example of that there. So there may be some involvement, but I hadn't considered the idea of, going knocking on their door and saying, we're going to come audit your facilities. But we must include them in the conversations in terms of what their provisions are. There's been a number of conversations that have occurred with them over time. Continuing those on, it is that partnership again. They are a major provider of facilities within this town here. We see the example that occurred with the Gawler Strikers and how the relocation from Carbeatham Reserve to Trinity College there has been a huge success across there. So that's a very good example of how we could better partner going forward with the school, with Starplex, to provide really positive outcomes.
So we need to do audits on all community facilities around sporting clubs, and what will we find? So
I think the outcome and what we presented back to council is similar to this here, and presented back in, I would suggest, possibly a workshop sort of setting in terms of the information that's being provided here, so council can get an overall view of the assets within the town.
Yeah, that's a really good plan. Yeah, Councillor Koch.
With the audit, we'll be looking at facilities that aren't being used, for example, Pemberford Grove and what's the one on Tingala Drive?
Humphrey George.
Humphrey George. I mean, both of those are sporting facilities, so will they be audited as well? Because if clubs are looking for extra grounds, I would assume that those two would have been high on the list.
Would they be on the list?
100%, yeah, for sure. We need to look in terms of what the opportunities are for there, and it may be we can assess that and say, okay, previously there's been cricket, there's been baseball, But what are the opportunities going forward? Maybe they work going forward, maybe they don't. But yes, those sorts of spaces, definitely.
Councillor Hennessy.
Thank you. Yeah, I might have missed it. So we're going to do the audit, and I can fully understand that. Will that be informed at the same time by a consultation with the organisations about what their future requirements are? Because it seems to me they're both sides of the coin. You have to have one to understand the other. So just, have I missed that, or we'll be doing the two things parallel?
Yes, definitely those two parts of this project will be running concurrently. Ideal scenario, I would go with the sports auditor down to a site and they could go and look at lux levels and I can talk to the committee. Might not work like that, but can only dream. Yeah.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Oh, Brian.
Yes, well, Bryce, you were talking about, Paul mentioned about Humphrey George Park and that to do with Hemmerford Park, you know, like is that still being kept in the equation to do something with it? Because, you know, like every time I drove past it, there's nothing on it and it's a beautiful ground. And with all the discussions that are going on about the phone tower and everything at the moment, it could be a way to offset some costs and to make the community in that area more happier sort of thing, you know. And the other part of the question is, it seems to have gone all very, very quiet with Springwood. And yet I've seen the maps of what is going to be built there with the school. Is that included in this project, or is it away from this discussion?
Well, in regards to the quarry site at Springwood, sorry, that's the area you're talking about there. So staff are working with Jensen relative to the community infrastructure up there and the updates of the deed. So we'll have an understanding of what that will be going forward and how that may or may not involve a sporting club or an organisation or those sorts of things. So we'll be considering that. And yeah, Hemmerford Grove, we need to consider what that space is going forward. This is a perfect opportunity to look at, you know, what it can be, what it can't be, and then be able to make an informed decision going forward. Is it an active, organised sporting area, or is it a community open space? They're the decisions to be made.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Bryce? No. Have you finished your presentation? Thank you. I think we might wrap it up. If there's no further questions, I think that's been a very thorough presentation. Thank you, Bryce. And yeah, I think we could go home. Thank you.